Allow me to begin my discussion with a quote from one of my favourite films, the 2007 release The Great Debaters, said by actress Jurnee Smollett-Bell. Well, would you kindly tell me when is that day going to come? Is it going to come tomorrow? Is it going to come next week? In 100 years? Never? No. The time for justice, the time for freedom, and the time for equality is always right now. Seems a bit far-fetched since the differences in our topics are large, but focus on that last sentence. Justice, freedom and equality aside. As you can probably tell from the title of this video, I'm going to be discussing about Jaguar cars, pretty much the most synonymous brand to the United Kingdom. It is easy to see why with some of the cars they have brought out, and let's go through some of them, shall we? Starting off with, basically, Genesis. The XK120 from 1948 to 1954, it paved the way of what should be known when you think of a Jaguar car. A pure British sports car with the class of the bigger, more luxurious companies, but with added bite to show you've got no time for the working class. Available in a more known open top or the option for a fixed roof, this little two-seater just wanted the rich man to just get out and drive the way they wanted to. That in itself doesn't make Jaguar well known with their cars. There was also their racing pedigree, and boy did the XK120 have it. It showed promising results in its first tries at Le Mans, Targa Florio and Mille, only for mechanical issues to get in the way, but there were victories in Pebble Beach, Silverstone and in the Alpine Rally. Bearing in mind that every event that I have just mentioned all happened in 1950. A year later, the XK120 took a second victory at the Alpine Rally, as well as another victory in the Tulip Rally. 1954 is where it gets interesting. A fixed head coupe won the 24 Hours of Mount Druitt in Australia, and there was another that was the first ever imported car to win a NASCAR race. Yes, a NASCAR race. It's also the reason why cars manufactured in the US are only available to race in NASCAR. All in all, seems like a good history for the car already, but that's what it was not famous for. Those three numbers next to the model designation code, 120, mean something pretty special. They represent the top speed of the car. In 1949, chassis number 660002 set the record for the world's fastest production car with a top speed of 124.6 miles an hour. And this was in 1949. This record stood for 6 years until the Mercedes 300 SL Gullwing came along. Now we move on to a car whose synonymity could match Ford's with the Mustang that I mentioned in the previous video, the Jaguar E-Type. Even though it is a continuation from the XK150 Roadster, it was based off of the D-Type race car that was successful in its days in Le Mans. Using a tub chassis involving two sub-frames directly bolted, the weight was kept as low as possible, from 1200 kilograms to 1400 depending on body style. This was even a revolutionary action to take, as the 1960s saw full use of the conventional ladder chassis, which involved more components to use. Engine options included a 3.8 or 4.2 inline-six for the first generation, both giving out 265 horsepower and taking the light body to 150 miles an hour. With the use of the tub chassis, it had independent suspension and disc brakes all round. It was not only cheaper than the well-known competition, but it was also better performing, to which celebrities such as Steve McQueen and Frank Sinatra ended up having one. It's hard even for a car today to have such an impression on many celebrities like the E-Type did. I only mention the first generation, and it is the most influential from its humble beginnings and the outcomes they have received. What I mean is, the body that one sees on an E-Type was done with the help of a wind tunnel. However, in the 60s, the wind tunnel required a lot of electricity to operate, meaning that during business hours it simply could not happen. Usually, a manufacturer would just give up and find an alternative method for the design. Jaguar, on the other hand, wouldn't take no for an answer. They ended up using the wind tunnel in the late hours of the night to the early hours of the morning, since no one else in the entire country was using the electricity. The result? An instant hit. In its debut in 1961, a compliment was famously said, quote, "the most beautiful car ever made." It would have just been a regular compliment until you realise who said the compliment. Mr. Enzo Ferrari. It doesn't just stop there. The very first working prototype, registration 9600HP, was bound to be shown at Geneva with not enough time to transport the car via a boat, Therefore, executive Bob Berry was sent to drive from the Browns Lane factory in Coventry to Geneva with 20 minutes to spare before the official reveal. The same thing also happened for the first ever convertible E-Type, registration 77RW, driven by test driver Norman Dewis, who reached Geneva in time after averaging 68 miles an hour throughout the night. We now move on to the 1990s, where times have changed and there are some technological advancements comparing to the 60s. Jaguar had to keep up, and they continued to do so with the big dogs of performance cars. With some help from TWR, we have received the XJ220. Originally, the conception was to enter it in the notorious Group B rally, just like Ferrari and Porsche attempted to do so with the 288 and the 959. That conception cut short due to the ban of the sport regarding safety issues, which leaves Ferrari and Porsche off the table as well. Jaguar then intended to make the XJ220 a supercar that we all know today. Powered by the same 6-cylinder engine found in the MG Metro 6R4, the XJ220 followed suit of the XK120 with its cutting-edge features to show that Jaguar was fooling around. An example of it was now having a mid-engine layout. Just like the name designation, it had the ability to go 220 miles an hour. Although the recorded top speed was 3 miles an hour short of the name, it was still enough to score at the record of the world's fastest production car, and it would only be beaten by the most special of those record-holding cars, the McLaren F1. Throughout the entry into the new millennium, Jaguar's model portfolio was enough to give it that plucky Brit sense when you could see one, but over time started to become more and more subpar. With the introduction of the S and X-type models, they started to focus more on the mass and seemed to drift away from the glory days with the models that I had mentioned previously. Until 2010, when we received the CX-75 concept in the Paris Motor Show. Some said it was the spiritual successor to the XJ220, but I believe it's more to it than that. See, it was a step in the right direction as times were changing yet again. Hybridization and electrification were on the rise, and a company that is synonymous to petrol and diesel engines such as Jaguar, they were quick to react. This new supercar had two different hybrid powertrains dependent on the model. The concept had 4 electric motors with gas turbines giving out 780 horsepower, and the development models had 2 motors with a Williams F1 developed turbocharged and supercharged 1.6 inline-4 giving out 890 horsepower. The reason I mention no production models as there were none, it financially wasn't worth it at the time. The closest it got to was an appearance in a James Bond film, but it gave the company a lesson in hybridization and the use of electric motors. So why do I mention all these cars and not blatantly give my point of this video yet? Well, I want you to think about Jaguar now, their current model portfolio, themselves as a business, and their current reputation. There isn't much that has the same panache as the other models I have mentioned. They have tried to fill in the mass gaps as much as they can with the XC sedan and the introduction of SUVs. Electrification has happened, but on an SUV is a Tesla Model X competitor. I wouldn't count the F-Type as one of them panache cars either. It's basically a better looking XKRS, having a constant identity crisis of whether it's a GT car or a sports car. Jaguar right now are just a competitor for Germany's Big Three, and the way to solve this is to make another flagship car, and now is the right time to do so. Allow me to explain. We are in the final steps of internal combustion engines, and mass electrification is on the rise. Obviously Tesla are market leaders, but it's still a new thing, so new companies are spawning quite quickly, with the likes of Rimac, NIO and Apex creating new electric benchmarks with their hypercars. This has caused quite a stir for existing companies to have a go at it as well, and a big example is Lotus. A company with a rather narrow model portfolio with the Elise, Exige and Evora, they managed to bring out the all-electric Evija. A car that we would have never expected to see. Having 1900 horsepower, it is able to pitch itself against the very best of hypercars and allows the company to set its best foot forward into the future. Yes, we remember Jaguar for their i6s and V8s, but their internal combustion engines put their reputation on thin ice. A report was shown in 2019 that 44,000 cars had to have a recall due to confirmations that the 2-litre engines were producing more emissions than it should have. That brought the sales down more than they already have when you count the portfolio I mentioned. If Jaguar want to have more stability in terms of sales and reputation, they need to build an all-electric halo car. They have potential and the resources to do so thanks to their previous experience and the involvement with Formula E. I mean, just imagine an all-electric CX-75 or something of the sort. Not only it will save the reputation as a business, but also entice enough purists to put Jaguar back on the map as the big cat. Being a car enthusiast from the city of Coventry, Jaguar is rather special to me, and I'd hate to see the brand lose the charm it all had. It's not the adverts of Tom Hiddleston sipping tea in a helicopter, but the cars you think about. Sometimes they'll make something utmost unexpected from the last car they built, and I hope they use this philosophy for what I've been discussing to keep that charm and hopefully make Jaguar a brand worth supporting. As I said at the beginning, the time for Jaguar to do this is always right now. Thank you guys for watching this video. Hopefully you've learned something new with this. Comment down below if you'd like to start a discussion with me, if you agree or disagree with my points. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one.